Meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shopta at C70. Hoping to have Alan Medlock in tonight, but he had his AD duties take him away from us, so we won't have him, but we have quite a nice guest for us tonight. We've got an icon, and I don't use icon very often, but that is truly what our guest is. Bernie Miklasz from, you know him from everywhere, but especially from the YouTube now on the Bernie Show. Bernie, how are you doing tonight?
Daniel, I'm doing great. And we were talking before we hit the record button there. You know, it's nice to meet you finally. And it sounds weird because we're meeting on a podcast, but that's the world and the era
Mhm.
we live in. But no, I'm serious. I've appreciated your work for a long time. I subscribe to your Substack, and when made the invitation, I was like, oh, of course, of course. So it's really nice to meet you and to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Well, oh, and I appreciate it. And this is like, let's see, like a triple header at least for you. I know you've recorded your own show today, and you've been on with dealing with the cards. Oh, a quadruple. You had probably the Gas House Gang earlier today.
I did.
You keep active. There's no doubt about it.
And I have another video that I recorded after I was with dealing the gang, my good friends from dealing the cards, doing their YouTube live stream, and I said, well, I've got time before dinner. There's a video I want to do about Ivan Herrera or Ivan
Mm.
Herrera. So I got one in the hopper. I don't know whether to put it up tonight or wait until the morning. But anyway, yeah, I've been going at it pretty good. It started with, and by the way, I'm not looking for any medals, but started with KMOX at about 11 o'clock this morning. Then the Gas House Gang on KMOX. Then I finished a column, and then I jumped on dealing with the cards at 4:30. I did another video, had some dinner. Now I'm with you. So yeah,
Yeah.
whatever money I'm gonna make today, I think I've worked for
You've earned it. You've earned it.
it.
We do not do video here, so I want to ask before getting further started. Every time I watch one of your shows, you've got a different hat on.
Right.
So if you've got one on now, what is it and what's the significance?
It is um, a hat of the Satruse Crabbers, which is a very prominent, almost iconic professional baseball team in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And I wear that because the team that Yadi Molina is managing there, I couldn't find any of their hats anywhere. But I figured Yadi would appreciate it. It's a gesture of respect to him, but also how much they love baseball on that island.
Mhm.
And I love the cap too. It's got a crab on the front, and it's blue, and it's just kind of cool. I couldn't resist, but I love collecting those vintage caps. It's become a bit of a hobby, and I think people they never know what they're going to see. What hat am I having today? And there's usually a backstory, so I try to tell the story too. So thanks for asking. Yeah.
Yeah, those are that is great. So before we talk about the Cardinals, who could have not given us a whole lot to talk about pretty much all
Ooh.
winter long, and yet you still do 2 or 3 shows a day. Let's talk a little bit about how this career shift has gone for you. I mean, you've gone from being, well, if you want to go way back from the Post Dispatch into radio, and now into maybe let's just broadly call it the internet.
Right.
What's that transition been like for you?
It's actually been pretty easy, and I'll explain why. And I really don't want to come across as bragging about anything because I'm not. But I'm just telling you kind of the whole story, and I'll try to be quick about it. But when I was really young and starting out, I mean, I had a part-time job at the Baltimore News American that became a full-time job at like age 20, and I always was making sure that as much as I love to write, and that I figured that'd be
Mhm.
the destination of my career. I was always curious about radio. I was always curious about whatever. And so radio, for example, that became a parallel career for me going back to my Baltimore days,
Mhm.
where someone took a liking to me. They had me on doing a show on Friday nights. It was actually the Orioles flagship station, WBAL in Baltimore. And then they gave me some hosting duties and things like that. So anyway, fast forward, I moved to St. Louis in '85, and KMOX put me on the air right away, even though I was a football writer. But they had me doing football shows with Dan Deerdorf, so I was doing a lot of radio. I mean, a lot of radio. And then when
Mhm.
I went to Dallas, I was doing radio at KRLD, which is the Cowboys flagship station. So I did the great Brad Sham and so many distinguished guests. I was part of a roundtable twice a week. So I was all the whole way through. I was always doing radio.
Mhm.
And when I came back to St. Louis, more radio. So then the way newspapers have changed. When this thing called the internet sprouted up, I said, well, I'm not going to like wait on this. I'm going to try to get in there early because I think this is a really valuable way to communicate with people. I have a column. People probably want to get at me. They want to talk to me. They want to get, raise some cane, and that's fine. And so I started an online forum
Mhm.
uh, way back when. I
Yeah.
mean, way back when. And I think it was one of the first of its kind among like major city newspaper columnists. And it was a wild place. I mean, it was crazy. People were just going bananas in there all the time, but a lot of good conversation, a lot of fun stuff, sometimes irritating. But it got to so popular that Dave Duncan, the pitching coach of the Cardinals, used to monitor it, and he actually started making posts. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm looking at his handle, and it was something like PC 18 or something, and
Uh-huh.
well, that's Dave Duncan, and he would take various posters to task for stuff that they were saying about the Cardinals because he thought they were wrong, and so he would challenge posters, and it would get really saucy in there. And I finally went to our tech guy and I said, "Can you just make sure that this is Dave Duncan? I want to be absolutely sure." And so he ran the IP check and everything else, and indeed it was Dave Duncan.
Wow.
And that took the Bernie's press box to a whole new level. But my point is, like, my friends around the country said, like, why are you doing that? You're crazy. Why do you feel like you have to do that? I said, because I have an audience and they want to talk to me, and this is a way to talk to them. And I'm like, hey, fellas, I think this internet thing's going to last. I think it's going to be something. So, so I got on the, on the ground on the internet pretty early. And then, since that time, I've always tried to stay up with the trend, social media and such. And then my wife had been encouraging me for 2 or 3 years to do my own YouTube channel, and I always kind of resisted. So now I'm doing that, and I love doing. You and I were talking. I love doing video. I love podcasting. It's fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've been in the podcasting game about as long as anybody too. I mean, back there with
Right.
Derek Gould, starting with that podcast, and now with Will Leach on Seeing Red. I mean, and not only just even when you're looking at just traditional podcasting, not even the video part of it, you've got plenty of experience in that realm as well.
Well, that's right, and even all the video stuff that I do for myself and also for KMOX, the Gas House Gang, that's also available in podcast form.
Yeah.
So you're hitting two platforms at once. I mean, you do the traditional podcast form, or if people prefer to watch My Ugly Mug or whatever, then they can watch it. So it's fun. It's fun, and you and I were talking, and I love writing. I love it, love it, love it. But I got to tell you what, it's harder to write now because one of my problems is I try to go too in depth. I try to research too much,
Hmm.
and I get sort of lost in my own mind. And I'm writing, and it's the piece I'm working on. It gets long and longer and longer and longer. And man, after a while, it just kind of mentally wears you down. So I'm still going to write, but I may switch to Substack. I may take on a different form. I may do shorter stuff. I may do kind of a game review type thing once the season starts. I'm still trying to figure out what's next for writing because I'm never going to give it up. It's just a matter of like sort of finding something to match my
Hmm.
lifestyle and my other career endeavors right now. So if you have any advice on that, let me know.
Oh, I don't, because if I sit down to write a post, it's like an hour and a half later before it gets done, and it's just, just trying to think it all out and, put it all down there. So I have never mastered the short post. Mine are always like the
Same
10-minute,
here.
15-minute read. So when you look at it, so,
A
uh,
quick story. A long time ago, a friend of mine who was a columnist of the Boston Globe, Michael Madden, and we always had a tradition before the Super Bowl, wherever it was played, the day before the Super Bowl, a few of us would go to wherever the horse track was, and we would just catch our breath, unwind, maybe have a beer or two, bet some horses, just good, clean fun. It seriously was. And so he said to me, what he said, man, I noticed, you're writing like two or three stories a day at the Super Bowl. I said, yeah. And he said, can I ask you a question? He said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He said, are you feeling any brain damage yet? I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I was like you when I was a lot younger, and all I did was write and write and write and write. And then one day, he said, I can't even tell you when, it became as hard as heck to do.
mm,
And I said, well, what are you saying? Your brain damage? He said, no, I'm like a pitcher. You throw so many pitches and then you just wear out and it becomes harder to do. Have you experienced that yet? And I'm kind of like, no. But I know what my friend was talking about. I
mhm.
do. It's just harder now. And hey, I'm still fighting the good fight, but it's harder. It's much more difficult. And I'm not in any way embarrassed or ashamed to admit that.
No, and I mean, sometimes those starting pitchers shift to the bullpen and, don't throw quite as often. So,
That's right.
maybe that's what we should take the example from. So,
That's right.
Um, I had Brendan Schaefer on last week, and he and you, and I thought about it later. I guess the Locked On Cardinals feed are pretty much the only people that put out like daily post, and Brendan does daily a lot more during the season. But and I asked him if he thought his radio background lended it to being able to do that. And then he wanted me to ask you that as well. Do you think it's the radio part of you that lets you get out there pretty much every day and do a podcast?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Because as I mentioned, I've just done it for
Mhm.
so many years, and it's very comfortable for me to speak. I could do it better. I really could do a better job of it. I tend to ramble. Well, as you're finding out on our podcast here, I tend to ramble. I tend to be long-winded. I could be more efficient. I always have a lot of information. I could do a better job of packaging it so uh, people don't have to listen to like way too many stats or whatever. So I know there's a need for me to improve, but I still feel like it's very natural to me, and people seem to like it
Mhm.
because I'm if nothing else, I'm authentic. There's nothing prepackaged with me. There's no special effects. There's no bells and whistle. It's kind of what you hear or what you see is what you get. And
Mhm.
people seem to appreciate that I go in depth, in great depth with an opinion, and I'm not just kind of winging it.
Yeah.
But again, I see a need where I could also be better. I think if I do shorter podcasts, shorter shows, things like that.
I mean that it's a possibility, but I also think that you know there is part of I know I think about it to some degree. We lost Bob Euchre today, but I think part of the charm of a Euchre or even a Buck or Scully was being able to tell the story. It didn't matter how long the story was, right? It was how they told it, and so sometimes shorter is not necessarily better. I mean, in our short attention span world, sometimes maybe that it comes across that way. But I think being able to really give the details is an important thing.
I do too, and the subscribers to my YouTube channel, a lot of them, encourage me to
Mhm.
to talk as long as I want to talk. And and other people say they're too long. I like you, but they're too long, and I understand, like on both sides. I don't think there's any right answer. So what I might do, and I think the 2025 baseball season will give me a chance to reset. Oh, I shouldn't use that word. Sorry. It'll give me a it'll give me a chance to kind of come up with maybe a new system. Like for example, I may do one. This is what I'm thinking about. I may do one YouTube video a day on the Cardinals that is longer and it is in depth. But there's also nothing wrong with me doing one or two more throughout the day that might be, 8 or 9 minutes long,
Hmm.
so that way, the people that like it short, I'll do that. The people that prefer in depth, I'll do that. So, and I need to start doing some other things like having guests and maybe doing some live streams. But I am still, trying to get comfortable in the format to an extent. I wish that I was more technologically sound. I'm not. And that's a real weakness because you figure by now with radio and all this stuff has been, in part of my career, I would have learned how to do some things to make these videos look better, to have some graphics, to be able to put a chart and put it on the screen rather than me reading numbers, to show, just to let people
Right.
see it on the screen. Uh, and I really do feel like a goofball in that I feel so helpless with some of this stuff. And so I told my wife all the time, I wish there's a place I could just go away to for like 4 days
Mm.
and they'll just teach you how to do all this stuff, because I'm sure it's easy once you figure it out or someone shows you.
Right. Yeah, or have the right program or right equipment. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is one reason we just do podcasting or just do audio is because I don't have any idea how to mess with video. So, but I agree, it's probably once you figure it out, it's not that hard. But getting that first step is a doozy.
Right.
But if you ever find out that they have a podcasting spring training, I guess let me know and we'll go
That's what
together.
we
So.
tend to go together. Yeah, no doubt about it.
So let's shift then to the Cardinals. As you said, you don't want to use the reset button for you because if you try to do a reset, that means you probably wouldn't put up anything for the next 6 months. And we don't want that. Um, yeah, I saw I think it was yesterday's video, and you were talking about how kind of weird this off season has been, and I felt that way as also. It's just it's an off season like we've never seen before. Not only is it a lack of activity, but there's a lack of expectation of activity as well.
And it's so strange, and I think everybody knows it, and everybody feels the same way. And there's a lot of anger and frustration out there. I don't blame anybody for feeling that way, but there's also just a lot of confusion out there. And what I keep coming back to is that it's easy to kick John Mozeliak around, but so I try to. I'm not afraid to say whatever I want to say, but I also try to be fair about it. And the thing I keep coming back to that this offseason is kind of really typical for John Mozeliak because he's had a hard time getting out of the middle for a long time now.
Mhm.
Where they try him and Bill DeWitt try to build a club, a roster each year, and they go so far. And they certainly don't want to be bad. They certainly don't want to be a losing team. They want to build a team that they feel can win and make the playoffs, but they're only going to go so far with that. And so what has happened to them is they've been just stuck in the middle. They're not awful. Well, they were awful in 2023,
Mhm.
but let's be real. They're not awful. They're disappointing, but they're not awful. They are competitive. They do put up most of the time winning seasons. But this strategy of staying in the middle, number one, it hurt them in recent years because smarter organizations, the Brewers being the greatest example,
Mhm.
the Cardinals are outspending them by quite a bit, but yet the Brewers have taken over. They've won since 2017. They've made the playoffs more times. They've won more division titles than the Cardinals, and this is the fact that the Cardinals, despite the fact the Cardinals have spent over $400 million more on payroll over that time, which is one of the reasons why I always say, listen, there's more to this than payroll.
Mhm.
Being smart is a big part of it. So anyway, they've just been trapped, stuck in the middle. They thought, well, the middle is a good place to be because then you can pivot, you can make a trade at the deadline, you can get better like near the end, and then make your push. And that sort of became their whole method. But now they're trapped in it and they don't know where to go. And what I mean by that is, well, what's a reset? They won't say rebuild. It's a reset. Reset implies, oh, it's just a little thing. We're going to be right here. We're going to be right here. We're going to be competitive. And if you think about it, they're not saying, it's like they're afraid to say they need to rebuild or they need a
Mhm.
softer rebuild, not a tear down. But no, they want to stay in that middle. They want to give the impression that they're going to be pretty good. They're going to be competitive. They're going to try to win. But at the same time, well, they're slashing and slashing payroll, and I'm totally in favor of what they're doing in the minor leagues because that was one of the reasons why that they got into this spot to begin with. They stopped producing their own really good players that they could count on, and they had to go out like Mozeliak last winter, and he did a good job under the circumstances. Where all of a sudden you're trying to assemble like a rotation
Yeah.
uh, like on scratch, like, putting it together on scratch, like, oh, I got to go out and, get three pitchers. And there used to be a time where they would develop their own and you could count on it. And so by the fact that the farm system fell apart and the players are coming up here, they're not fully prepared or developed. It just became this one thing that weakened their foundation, the foundation they had so long. But again, they're in the middle. They won't commit to a rebuild. They're still trying to convince everyone that they're trying to win in 2025. The biggest, they haven't added anyone. They haven't, after subtracting Goldie and also the fact, they didn't pick up the options on Lynn and Gibson. Um, they have been totally still. They're not adding anyone. Uh, they haven't signed anyone. They haven't spent any money. They haven't made a trade. And there's two kinds of trades that they could make that would take them out of the middle. They would either trade to get help in a significant way for 2025, or if they would actually admit to what's going on, this is more of a soft rebuild. They could flip Eric Fetty and Ryan
Mm-hmm.
Helsley, um, who are assets, and before they leave as free agents, they could sort of sell them at higher value, and they still can do that now, or they still can do that at the trade deadline. But they they're just having a hard time really just going one way or the other. They know they're not going to go all in to win because they've been in the middle too long, and they're afraid of making that commitment of ratcheting up the payroll to a sky high amount. They're never going to be way up there, but they know they've also won a lot being the 10th ranked payroll, ninth ranked, the 11th ranked payroll. But they can't commit to maybe going all in, but they also can't commit to things like maybe it'd be best to trade Ryan Helsley and Eric Fetty right now. And the biggest project they had all off season was trading at Nolan Arenado, and to this point they haven't. So that's a big nothing so far as well. So anyway, I didn't mean to ramble on, but I'll try to shorten up as we go along.
No, I mean people are here to hear you, not me, so don't worry about that. And yeah, I agree. I thought when they came out this in October and said that they were doing a reset, I took that to mean, okay, we're not going to trade off the Donovans, the Wins. We're not going to just strip it down to the bones, but we're going to try to move anybody that is going to be afraid, like Helsley, like Fetty, anybody like that. I don't know if do you, and I think I've talked about this with some others, but do you think the idea that they went into this winter and thought, okay, we're going to tell people we're not going to, necessarily compete. So Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras and Nolan Arenado are all going to, beg to leave. And then when Gray and Contreras not only stayed, but Contreras willing to move positions, do you think that changed their mind a little bit? That they said, "Well, we've got these guys, so we can't really, like you said, we got to get stuck in the middle."
I think that's a great theory because I think it took them by surprise.
Mhm.
Why wouldn't Sonny Gray want to go somewhere with a chance to win and win right away? Even if he said told to them it's got to be somewhere close. It can be if it could be Atlanta, it could be Cincinnati, it could be any number of places in this region. But he was very enthusiastic about wanting to stay. Wilson Contreras, as you alluded to, also was. I think that kind of gummed up their strategy, whatever the strategy was going to be in terms of how far they were going to take this, whether a reset was going to turn into a rebuild. And a rebuild is different than a teardown. But now it's kind of like it's almost like it's tantalizing to them because they think, well, some of these young guys hit. So the guys we're counting on, if they're all a lot better, if everybody gets better, we help them get better. We work in a couple young starting pitchers. It's kind of like they're talking themselves into, well, maybe. So and I'm being redundant, but again, they're kind of like right in the middle, and they're
Mm.
not sure which way to go.
Yeah, and I agree with their mindset that St. Louis can't handle the Chicago Cubs, Houston Astros type of rebuild, right? They're not St.
Right.
Louis is not a place that's going to handle 100 losses 3 years in a row or anything of that way. Just trying to get the top pick, which of course is different now with the draft lottery. You can't really even do that. Um, so I get that, but I just felt like they primed everybody to say, "Hey, okay, look, this one's going to be a tough year. We're going to do this, but it's going to be we're going to pay off in 26 or 27."
Right.
And then they didn't really do anything.
No.
Um, in this, I've had other people mention this, and I think there's some fairness to it. It doesn't feel like the front office ever quite recovered from, as I think Ben Humphreys over at Cardinals Off Day calls it, the brain drain, that when Jeff Ludnow left and took everybody with him.
Oh
It
yeah.
just doesn't seem that ever recovered from that.
100% agreement. Listen, it was inevitable that Jeff Luna was going to leave, right?
Mhm.
Because
Right.
he got so much credit, well deserved, because Bill DeWitt hired him in the early aughts. It was 2003, I believe. And he said, and to Bill DeWitt's credit, he told Jeff Luna, he said, "Listen, we have a great team, but the way we're going about this, as great as it is, it's not going to be sustainable because we have to always go out and make trades, and we always have to go out and sign people. And right now, it's affordable." And Bill DeWitt was right, and he said, we're not going to be able to make these easy trades where teams just give us Mark McGuire or Daryl Kyle or right on down the line,
Mhm.
Jim Edmonds. Yeah, he told Jeff, he said, so I'm a little concerned about the future because I don't think we're developing players. We're not, which is a Cardinals tradition. We do
Mhm.
not have the same type of homegrown talent on the way, constantly on the way, constantly on the way. Then you can supplement it by adding players from the outside who are more expensive. I spent 3 hours with Bill DeWitt talking about why he hired Jeff Luno because people were
Mhm.
confused, and everything that he said made perfect sense to me, and I understood what he was trying to do. And that's when they really took off as an organization in terms of winning, and winning big, and winning for a long time, because they still had the stars, but this that they had that Memphis Mafia, or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
They were always plugging in people from their farm system, good pitchers, good young position players, guys who could move all around. Guys like John Jay, who never were going to be on an all-star team, but they were really valuable pieces to a winning team. That they got away from that. They let the farm system slide, and the player development gains they had made, the international market, the gains they had made, all that kind of fell apart after Luna left. And it wasn't just that. And Bill DeWitt told me one time, and it wasn't all that long ago. He said, "Listen, when someone leaves as a general manager, and we were happy, we were as a general manager for another place. He said we were really happy for Jeff.
Mhm.
And usually the way this works is, they want to take a couple or three people with them, and that's kind of, every team grants that kind of permission."
Mhm.
And he said, as a gesture to Jeff, I was very lenient with this. He said, but he told me they ended up losing like 8 to 10 people.
Mhm.
And some of those analysts were the sharpest, most brilliant analysts in the game, the people that were really giving the Cardinals an advantage competitively, because their drafts got better, their payroll efficiency got better, the farm system was booming again, and they knew what they were doing with drafting pitchers. So Bill DeWitt regrets that because he was too generous, because Sig Maydal was one of the people that
Right.
went to Houston. Mike Elias, who now rebuilt the Orioles, he was
Mhm.
one of Lunell's guys. Luno had several guys who were working in St. Louis that eventually became pretty important baseball executives for other teams. So uh, there's no doubt about it that that was a turning point. But all the good work that DeWitt did by hiring Luno, and the Luno effect, the system he put in place, really carried on for a while. It carried
Mhm.
through for a while. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, we're not we're not graduating players and pitchers to the minors the way we were before. So the Luno effect, let's just call it that, it ran out. It did have like an afterlife there for a while, but then it ran out.
Right. Yeah, as the league adjusted, the Cardinals weren't able to adjust with him because they didn't. It's almost like, and I don't want to say it this way because I don't think it's accurate, but it's almost like they didn't know how it worked. They just knew it did.
Right.
And so when they needed to tweak the formula, as it were, they couldn't do it. And
That's right.
that is, I think we've seen that they've taken too long to adjust that. You talked about talking with Bill DeWitt. Do you still hear from him? I mean, now that you're
Yeah.
out there on a regular
Yeah.
basis?
Yeah, every now and then. And if he doesn't get in touch with me, I get in touch with him. We have good conversations. It gives me a peek or some insight into what
Mhm.
he's thinking. And they're off the record conversations, but I really can glean some good insight. And I know some people are listening are probably going to be skeptical about that and say, "Oh, see, Bill's playing Birdie." No, we've always had a pretty open relationship as far as candor, and he trusts me that I will at least really make an attempt to understand what he's
Mhm.
up to. And the one thing I've told him is that uh, I want to have another conversation coming up fairly soon with him. I said, Bill, I really want to know because I sat with you for 3 hours and you walked me through the whole reasons why you hired Jeff Luno. And you told me where baseball was going and how the Cardinals had to be out in front of it with analytics, with metrics, with research and development. I said, you were way ahead of the curve as far as owners goes. You gave the Cardinals by bringing Luno in and letting them hire all these analysts. You set the Cardinals up where they were way ahead of the industry, just about all of the industry anyway.
Mhm.
And the thing I do not understand, and I have not had this conversation with him yet, is that was his baby. Like he was the one behind all that because he was so forward thinking, right?
Right.
And I don't understand how that same guy let what he built kind of lapse because they through the years their analytics department, their staff, it became a lot smaller. The money they were spending
Mhm.
on research and development, was smaller. It just sort of subsided over time. So they went from being ahead of the industry, leading the industry, to then lagging behind the industry. Because the thing of it is, all these other teams, as you know, all these other teams say, well, we look at what they've done here and done there, and that's clearly a great model and it works. So we need to do the same thing. Meanwhile, the Cardinals, who kind of showed the way on that stuff, they kind of fell back and I think they just assumed that their model was going to last. And I do think there was a little hubris there in terms of
Mhm.
like, well, we're the Cardinals, we know what we're doing, until they didn't anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sad. I don't think it had to happen. I think cycles are natural. I think Cardinals fans have a hard time with this because they got used to the Cardinals winning and winning and winning. And I did a piece, and people can read on scoopsnetwork.com, just pointing out how every team in baseball goes through these cycles, even great teams. And we
Mhm.
sort of forget about it now. And I'm like, it's kind of in a way, even though the Cardinals created their own problems here and they're responsible for letting it slide, it's also true that it's unrealistic to think you can win at that high level for a long, 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 long time. Even the Yankees, despite spending $3.2 billion in payroll since the start of the
Right.
2010 season, they haven't won another World Series since 2009. So if you go back team by team on Baseball Reference, as I did the last couple of days, it's really funny to see some of the things have happened. Like I kind of forgot after the Phillies lost to the Cardinals in the famous Roy Halladay Chris Carpenter game. The Phillies did make the playoffs for 10 straight years. Uh, I
Yeah.
didn't remember, but it's true. The Atlanta Braves had 4 consecutive losing seasons from 2013 through 17. Uh, some of the really, really good teams that we all admire, they have had big gaps where all of a sudden they just sink, and then they got to kind of try to swim back up the surface. So it's hard to explain. I don't blame Cardinals fans for being frustrated, but I think more than anything, this is just such a foreign experience to them, and I just think that I don't think that it's realistic that you would expect the Cardinals to stay at that highest a level like into perpetuity. That's just not how baseball works. But they did create a lot of their own problems.
I mean, right. I mean, they pretty much were for what, 25 years. And when you look at, especially the online fan base, which is not necessarily representative of everything else, but we'll take it for right now. A lot of those people don't remember a Cardinals team that didn't win, right? I mean, or a lot well. Um, have vague remembrances. I remember the end of the Brewery years, which were kind of off and not so pleasant. But starting in '96 and then the McGuire and everything like that, it's been a run that it kind of put those peaks and valleys that we have seen in Cardinal history, you kind of thought maybe you'd finally broken the cycle. And you're right, it doesn't happen forever.
Can I share a little bit of
Absolutely.
information with you because it's totally pertinent, and I was glad I dug this up because I came up with some good research on this. From 2000 through 2015, the Cardinals led the majors in postseason wins. Only the Yankees won more regular season games. But if we take Bill DeWitt's ownership in its entirety, 29 seasons, 1996 through 2024, I was looking at what every other franchise did during that time. So over the last 29 seasons, of the 30 franchises, 21 of the 30 franchises have made the playoffs at a rate of 31% or lower. Some of them, of course, much worse than that. But like, there's a group of teams, 21 teams, where the maximum rate of making the playoffs is like 31%. The Cardinals are one of 5 teams that have made the postseason in more than 50%
Mm.
since DeWitt took over. The Yankees at 82.7%, but again, I repeat, they've spent about $3.5 billion. The Braves are second at 69%. Then come the Cardinals and the Dodgers at 58.6%. So the Cardinals are tied for third with the Dodgers in terms of the percentage of seasons where you make the playoffs. And okay, they haven't made it 2 years in a row. And I think one of the problems is not only that, and you would agree, I'm sure everybody would.
Mhm.
One of the problems is we got used to all those great postseason runs and all those home games at Busch Stadium in October, the Sea of Red and all
Mhm.
that. It was wonderful stuff. But the Cardinals dried up in the postseason too. They're 4-11 in their last 15 games, 1-9 in their last 10 postseason games. So I think that creates a perception that is a perception with substance that the Cardinals are maybe worse than they really are, like, at
Mhm.
least up until 2023. Because when that
Yeah.
postseason success started to dry up, people, I think really lost patience with that. And so I don't think that Cardinals fans who are great, great fans and support the team tremendously, I don't think that the tolerance level um, held very well. And that's why I'm sort of talking about it's like, well, wait a minute. They made a lot of mistakes. It didn't have to be this way. I'm the first to say that. I've been very critical of ownership and management for that. But if you look at it through a wider lens, all the great teams that we look up to in baseball have gone through pretty much the same dang thing. In fact, in a lot of cases, much worse than what the Cardinals have been going through. But the early reaction to what I wrote is like people were, like, "Oh, is this supposed to make me feel better?" No, no, I'm not a doctor. I don't dispense drugs. But I was hoping that some perspective might make some people understand that this kind of thing is just sports. It
Yeah.
happens to all teams. I covered the Dallas Cowboys. It's unbelievable to me. I was still there when Jerry Jones bought the team and when he hired
Mhm.
Jimmy Johnson and all that. It's unbelievable to me they have not been back to an NFC championship game since 1995. You know?
Mm. Mhm.
So that's kind of what I'm talking about. If the Dallas Cowboys can go from the top of the mountain to where they can't even get back to a conference championship game in more than 30 years, um, it's sports, man. But I understand where Cardinals fans really don't want to hear me say that, but it's true. It's sports. This is what happens.
Yeah, and I've always wondered, if Ryan Helsley's finger isn't hurt in 2022 and they get past the first round, maybe even the second round of the playoffs, do people's mindsets shift a little bit? I don't know that they do. Honestly, I think we're a little bit of a, what have you done for me lately anyway? And 23 and 24 would have probably disabused anybody of those kind of things. But I do wonder if they'd had one deep playoff run in the midst of this, because you're right. I mean, we kind of forget that they made it a second round in 2019 because they kind of didn't show up. So you have to go back to what, 2014?
2014, yeah, they
Yeah,
beat the Dodgers in the LDS.
yeah, and played some good
Right.
games against the Giants.
So I think that void in the postseason really, whatever frustration is natural and understandable, I just think it intensifies and deepens that frustration because we don't, postseason baseball in St. Louis
Mhm.
became a ritual. It was something we could come to count on. It was something we look forward to just about every year. And as a sports writer, columnist, those were some of the greatest memories I've ever had covering all of those postseasons and seeing these giants of the game like Pujols and Molina and Carpenter and Wainwright and Rowland and Edmonds, and then right on down the line, David Freese. Too many to mention. Just to be able to watch that every October. Wow. I mean,
Hmm.
it was a special time and place. It really was. But those things don't last forever. That's the takeaway. And I think Bill and Mo could have done a better job of preventing things from deteriorating as much as they have. But it's also to be expected if you just pay attention to the cycles of sports
Yeah.
teams.
And I mean that your development sometimes is a lagging indicator, right? I mean that you
Hmm.
can still win at the major league level while things are starting to crumble in the minors, but once that hits, it hits. And I think that's where the Cardinals are right now
Yeah,
is they're finally reaping the fruits of their
right.
lack of labor.
And to your point about 2022, listen, that team was poised and talented
Mm-hmm.
enough to go on a long run. And I say this why, listen, I don't mean to tell you, listen, Daniel, listen. Yeah, I know you're listening. I don't know why I'm saying that. Listen, um, they, John Mozeliak made two great trades at the trade deadline that year where, Jordan Montgomery and Jose Quintana.
Hmm.
And so then you put them with, Michaelis was having a really good year. Wayno was having a really good year. They all of a sudden had a rotation where you would say, hey, that will play in October. And Quintana, I've almost got these things memorized. Quintana and Montgomery in their starts for the Cardinals, they had a combined like 2.51 ERA, and the Cardinals were 17-6 when they started. And it's like they got something here. I mean, you're having an MVP season from Goldie. You're having a number three MVP finish in the voting for Arenado. You're having this dream-like season from Pujols. It's Molina's final season. Some
Yeah.
of their young guys were really performing well, and you're like, Helsley's really really good, and all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. This is the best chance they've had in quite a while. This is a legitimately good team. So to your point, my friend, uh, screwing up game one uh, it just ruined it because
Yeah.
I also learned, covering the postseason with Tony La Russa, he would always talk about lightning strikes. And he said, this is a short season in the postseason. Every series short. It's short.
Mhm.
It's short. So if something bad happens to you, it's like you're getting hit by lightning. Where you're the one, you can hit the other team with lightning. For example, Anthony Reyes out pitching Justin
Mhm.
Verlander, first
Mhm.
game of this World Series in 2006. The Tigers never really recovered from that jolt. And so the Cardinals in 2022, they had a really outstanding team. They never recovered from that jolt. And they didn't have time to because it was a
Mhm.
best of three series.
Yeah, and it was what Aaron Nola in the second game, right? Or was it
Right,
Wheeler? I don't
right.
remember. One of
No,
the
yeah,
two.
it
But
was, it
either
was
way,
yeah,
it was going
Nola,
to be bad
right.
tough. So, so yeah. So we know the Cardinals have started to make changes. They've done some additions to the front office. They brought on Heimblum. They've added development people. But some of their public statements make me think that maybe they haven't quite figured it all out. You talked about doing a thing on Ivan Herrera. Um, and I feel like he should be the starting catcher for pretty much, most of the time this coming season. But it still feels to me like they're a little bit higher on Pedro Pages than I would like them to be.
Uh, Absolutely. And it really bothers me because it bothers me across a couple different lines. First of all, we all know Herrera needs some work defensively, but this is
Mhm.
also an organization that has not had a catching instructor. There was no one teaching him in the minors. He's not as naturally gifted defensively as Pages. He has to work at it. But it's tough for me to accept the fact that you're in effect going to maybe downgrade him because his defense isn't as good as the other guy. When you never really did hardly a thing to help him develop
Mhm.
defensively. So if this season is supposed to be set aside for letting young players have a full opportunity, you have a guy in Herrera who's got a very special capability offensively. He is really, really, really talented, and I think the best is yet to come. But if you don't like some of the aspects of his defense, first of all, throwing runners out. Oh, he has a terrible percentage last year. But you know what? Pajes did too. And you know what?
Hmm.
Wilson Contreras' throw out rate went down, and his has
Yep.
always been really good. The Cardinals do a bad job of looking within. They want to go to the easiest thing to point to and blame that guy, just the way they
Hmm.
threw Contreras under the bus in 2023 because the pitchers weren't doing their job. And there's a lot more going on here. A lot of this has to do, the pitchers do a lousy job holding runners on. And I think they've lagged in doing something about that as a manager and as a coaching staff. It's not just the catchers. It can't be just the catchers. Now, Herrera does need work. His arm needs to get stronger, and he needs to have better mechanics in terms of his pop time. His framing and blocking are really good. But isn't what 2025 is supposed to be about? You have a hitter, a young catcher with a great bat who can be dynamite as a hitter. And isn't this the time to play him and play
Hmm.
him a lot and let him work on his flaws? Isn't that what the season is supposed to be about? And I'm going to share one thing with you because you've been a lifelong Cardinals observer. I was looking in the franchise history. I was looking at age 24 hitters. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, catchers, age 24 catchers. And I'm like, well, last year, if you go by, weighted runs created plus, and I just use it as a snapshot. Herrera's offense was 27% above the league average. It was the second best on the team. But what I found in my research, I said, I'm going to look at all the catchers. I'm going to look at their age 24 seasons. And do you know that minimum of 250 plate appearances? Do you know that Ivan Herrera's offensive performance last year at age 24 was better than Ted Simmons at age 24, was better than Tim McCarver at age 24. Herrera offensively had the best offensive profile by a 24-year-old catcher during the expansion era. Now, this is where I wonder if they Daniel, if they still haven't learned any kind of lesson
Hmm.
whatsoever. Their offense has been 10th or worse in the National League in run score per game in 5 of the last 6 seasons. They really desperately need offense. They have this guy. He's got dynamite in that bat. And the whole vibe that they give off is they love Pages because his defense. Oh, the pitchers like him. And I'm like, are they really going to do this again? Are
Hmm.
they still so lost in space? They don't. Do they really understand what they have in Herrera and why it's mandatory that they need to work with him and help him improve defensively? It's just frustrating.
It is, and I think that, yeah, for everything that you've said. I mean, and he can't go to Memphis next year because I mean he doesn't have any reason to be down there. So if
Right.
he's not playing every day or not every, 2/3 of the time at least, how is he going to improve? So I mean, yeah, it's a little bit of learning the defense on the big stage, but that's what you got to do. And I agree. I think they do tend to lift up Pages' defense, and I don't know that it was that. It did not seem to be that much better, and definitely not enough to factor when you factor in the bat. I think the same kind of decision seems to be happening in center field between Michael Ciani and Victor Scott II, because there's a lot of talk about letting Ciani be out there, but I liked what I saw to Victor Scott at the second time there in August, and I think his bat is significantly better than Ciani's, enough to make up any kind of defensive difference.
And you're right. And once again, it was a situation where the Cardinals in the minor leagues did not have a full time outfield instructor.
Mhm.
So Victor Scott, as we all know, struggled with his first step or two. He took some awkward routes to the ball. These things are very coachable, and these things can be fixed. It's because he has all the athletic speed, and he's a smart guy, and everything else. Um, but there was no one to really work with him. Like other players were trying to work with him. There wasn't a coach on the ground in Memphis working with him. He came to the major leagues, and they brought him up out of desperation. I know Willie McGee tried. I know Willie McGee in 2023 actually did really make progress with Jordan Walker, and then he relapsed because, again, just the lack of a full time instructor. And so they never gave. This is what we're talking about with the player development system. They never gave Victor Scott the opportunity to work with a full-time instructor whose job exists to help players like Victor Scott II. And so when he gets to the majors, he's not like even in center field, he needs work.
Mm.
Um, and I think hitting, I think that it was almost predictable that he would struggle, and a lot of them do. But you're so right. Uh, Ali Marmol, who I think gets too much criticism about the wrong things, is the way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing about Ali Marmol that, and I like Ali, and I talk to him a lot, but that's whether I like him or not is irrelevant. I think he gets hung up on he has these fixations with certain thing, and I think he misses a bigger picture at times, because the impression that he's giving to media and through us fans is that Victor Scott's almost an afterthought there, because he said at the
Mm-hmm.
winter meetings, Marmol did. He said something along the lines of like, well, look, in the end, we got to do what's best for Victor Scott. In other words, let me translate. He's going to Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of like, well, we're going to give players runway, we're going to do all this, right? Well, they've already, in effect, written off Victor Scott as in terms of a contender for the starting center field job, because Marmol is absolutely obsessed with Siani. And Siani's defense was a pleasure to watch. And he did have a really good run of offense. But I also noticed when he had a really good run of offense before he got hurt late in the season, his batting average on balls in play was something like 450. So it was more of an illusion than anything,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because he doesn't hit the ball hard. And when you're hitting ground balls that are getting through or bloopers that are getting in, they are in love with this guy, and it almost saddens me because I really like Sihani, but they got to do better in center field. They just have to. It's not just about the defense. Your offense stinks. It's been really bad for quite a while. 2022 was the only exception, really. So anyway, it's frustrating, right?
It is. It is. And it just, I mean, like you said, you'd like to think that if there is this mindset change, that we would see, a little bit more, grace, if you will, for these players that, okay, we know you can, you're going to be this guy. We're going to let you go out here and prove it, which is what they were talking about. And I guess maybe that's just more for the guys like Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman. What do you think about those two? If they do get to play, 162 games or whatever, what do you think about them?
It's so easy for me to say, Nolan Gorman's problems are fixable, but I'm kind of a research nut. It's a strength and a flaw at the same time. And the thing about Gorman is that his strike zone judgment is still really, really lacking, because he had his best season in 2023, and one of the reasons why he had his best season, and for a player of age 23 that year, I mean, to slug 478 and hit 27 home runs, and there were times where he had the strikeouts under control. He was really making progress, and he was making progress for three primary reasons. The first one is he was punishing fastballs, especially high fastballs. He worked on that going into 2023. All of a sudden, he's punishing four-seam fastballs. The second thing is he attacks strikes. You go to StatCast and you look at the thing they call meatballs, and that's basically pitches right down the middle. He attacked those pitches, and he did major damage with those pitches. And the third thing he did in 2023 that worked well for him is he lowered his chase rate. He stopped chasing as many pitches out of the strike zone. So what happens in 2024? All of a sudden, the percentage of meatball pitches that he swings at, it goes down. It goes down by 10 to 12%, which makes no sense. He's watching like great hitters' pitches go right by him. He's chasing more. The other thing, all of a sudden, he can't hit a fastball. And the reason I say it's fixable is because we saw him do this in all three of those areas. We saw him do very well in those areas in 2023. So I know that it's in him to get back to that. And I'm hoping the new batting coach will make a difference. With Jordan Walker, I have to say it. He's a really nice guy. I have nothing and no reason to disparage him, but from a baseball standpoint, I think he has to learn to take coaching.
Mm.
He has to listen to people that are really trying to help him. When they say, "Listen, you let me show you these numbers. Yeah, you can hit for a pretty good batting average on ground balls because you hit the ball hard. But look at your slugging percentage. Look at your RBIs. Look at your doubles. Look at this. You have so much power in that swing. If you can get the ball in the air, your slugging percentage will be off the charts. Your slugging percentage on ground balls are nothing. So the way to maximize this great talent that you have to get the ball in the air more.
Mhm.
And so a lot of fans have pushed back against that, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I did a lot on this too. But you ought to see the difference in his batting average perform or his batting profile performance when he hits a ground ball compared to a fly ball or a line drive. It's night and day.
Yep.
So, but he has not been receptive to that. He sort of when they sent him down in 2023, he sort of had this thing. It's like, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do what I do best, or what's comfortable for me. That,
Mhm.
that's the wrong answer. I mean, he's a fine young man, but you're a newbie in the big leagues, and pitchers will eat you up
Mhm.
if they know what your weakness is. So you have got to make some changes. I think maybe last year, that terrible experience, I think maybe the light bulb went on and they have a new hitting coach now. So he'll have a whole new exciting, fresh voice to talk to about this. But he's got to be more receptive to coaching. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not criticizing his character or anything like that. He's just a young player who probably didn't get it when people were trying to help him.
Well, and I mean, a young player especially, it's like, this is what got me here.
Right.
I don't really want to change it because it might not, I might not take. And so, yeah, I get it. But you're right. It takes a little bit of wisdom to realize that what got you here isn't it's going to keep you here.
Would, may I ask you a question? Like, because I like getting opinions from knowledgeable people who follow this team closely, but also very fair minded. And you qualify for sure on that. What are your thoughts on Walker and Gorman both? Are you confident? Are you maybe on the more pessimistic side? Like where right now, how do you see them?
I will say I'm a little bit more pessimistic on Gorman, although I think all the points that you make are very good, and I'm hopeful that he will make those changes and bring it back. I do, you said that anytime you start getting those high strikeout rates, it concerns me, and that's a lot of his game. But he's young, and if I was to pick one, I'd probably just pick Jordan Walker. But we haven't seen as much from him, so it's easier to dream on him a little bit. Um, so yeah, I'm a little bit pessimistic on Gorman. That being said, I know there's a lot there. And I don't think, I'm not one, and I know you've talked about it on one of the shows. I'm not a person that says you trade Nolan Gordman now for, 3 magic beans and 2 cups of coffee. I think that you don't trade him now because he has no value. I mean, you've got to, if he comes around, then maybe you talk about it. But um, I want to see what he can do, and I think that this is a season that hopefully will give him a chance to do that.
Yep. We're going to find out a lot more. And one thing I don't like to do, but I am doing it, so I'm kind of violating my own principles. I don't want to put everything on Brant Brown. I think Brant
Hmm.
Brown has got an excellent background. I mean, if you work for the Dodgers for 5 years and the Dodgers keep moving you up because they think you're really really good, Andrew Friedman and those guys out there, they know what they're doing and they like Brant Brown a lot, but he could get a lot more money by going to Miami, be the hitting instructor.
Hmm.
I don't care that he got fired in Seattle because they don't have no clue what they're doing. But Skip Schumacher raved about him, and he just said, "Look, this is exactly what you need." He was my batting coach. He improved us categorically on offense. Their offense in the league ranking still wasn't all that hot, but that's not the point. They were a lot better than they were before he got there. And so all the Cardinals had to hear was Skip Schumacher's endorsement. And I think Chaim Bloom working is kind of like the secret squirrel, probably talked to
Hmm.
Andrew Friedman about it as well. So Brant Brown seems like a really good fit. And so we'll find out. I mean, I do think he's a source of hope. And again, I almost feel guilty putting that on him because we are really hard in our town on hitting coaches. We really are,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah, pitching coaches don't get the same amount of grief. I think that maybe because Dave Duncan was here for so long and so successful that he gets a little bit more of a pass. But yeah, there have been a lot of people on hitting coaches for a long time. I guess probably the only one that didn't get a whole lot of grief was Mark McGuire.
and he was good. He
Yeah,
really truly was good.
yeah. Um,
I sat with him down in Jupiter around the batting cage they have, the one at their facility, not out on the field.
hmm,
And he explained to me his hitting philosophy, which he actually was his own hitting philosophy, but it made all the sense in the world. And he got all the Cardinals to buy into it. And his hitting principles, his concepts are really simple, but they're really really smart. As long as players are disciplined to go along with it. And his work with that offense was outstanding. And he had some talent, yes, but they got a lot of contributions from players that I didn't expect they'd get really good contributions from. Hey, when Lance Berkman shows up after a bad year in Houston and he's raving about working with Mark McGuire and
mhm.
all that McGuire's taught him, that's good enough for me right there. But
Yeah.
every player would offer the same testimony, every hitter.
We've talked about a couple of disappointing young players. Let's talk about let's end this with on an up note. Cardinals have at least two really good young players I can think of in Brendan Donovan and Mason Wynn. I am a huge Mason Wynn fanboy, and
Mhm.
I'm really impressed with what he did last year. What do you see for those two guys?
I think Mason Wynn is going to be a real star, which is not exactly going out on a limb because I think we all feel that way. But I think he has a chance to be, really, really special. And his poise and his maturity and his ability to process information and make adjustments at his young age is really, really impressive. There aren't that many guys that come to the big leagues as young as he did and figure out right away, okay, this is how they're getting me out. This is what I'm doing wrong. This is what I have to do. I'm going to do it. Boom. And even when he came up at the end of 23, where he was really like his stats were really bad. But it's amazing how even within that, he straightened himself out because the first
Mhm.
month he was in the big leagues, uh, he had always drawn walks and he likes to draw walks. But his first month in the big leagues, he was just jumping at everything. He wasn't drawing walks. He was striking out a bunch. And he said, I've got to turn this whole thing around. I'm not, I'm going to cut down on swinging and everything. And I'm going to try to draw some walks. Go back at Fangraphs or whatever and look at what he did the final month of the season. Walk, 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 strikeouts way down. I mean, that's uncanny for a guy that
Yeah.
young to have that self awareness. And he's incredibly gifted athletically and talent wise. I also think he's got some leadership qualities too. He's a tough kid. I shouldn't call him a kid. He's a young man. He's a tough young man. And I think he'll become one of the leaders of the Cardinals, along with Brendan Donovan for sure, who I like a lot as far as his ability to hit for some power, draw a lot of walks, get on base, wear pitchers out, play a bunch of different positions, and handle them very fine, above average at most of those spots, but never an embarrassment anywhere you put him. I think Donovan is a guy that really wants to be a leader. I think Mason
Mhm.
Wynn wants to be a leader, and I'm all for that. Did I leave one of the guys out? I apologize.
No, no, those are both.
Okay,
Those are the only ones I mentioned,
all
and
right.
I agree. I think that was a little bit of the frustrating thing last winter when they made such a emphasis on leadership was that they had some leadership on that team. They just weren't, empowering it. Now, I think you do need a veteran or two, you know, to teach them what they don't know, if you will. But you can let a Donovan or a Win or somebody take the reins, even if they don't have all that major league experience.
And and I think this is one of the things that has to be done in 2025 as far as this reset. There needs to be a new generation of leadership in the clubhouse emerge because the leaders for a long time, way back when was Albert. And then you had Molina and Wainwright. You also had some other great position
Mhm.
players. Like John Jay was a very good leader in his own way, more than people know. Same with Alan Craig. Same with Descalso. They weren't like superstar players, but they felt comfortable trying to be leaders in the clubhouse, and they were very good at it. And Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, listen, I have nothing bad at all to say about Goldie. Don't get me wrong, but it's not his style
Hmm.
to be really proactive and to go up and to tell a player, "Hey, listen, man, I got to talk to you about this. I believe in you. You got so much talent, but there's some things you got to start doing." He's not one of those guys. Someone made a comment to me that one time, and I laughed, but it's true. He said Goldie would have been like the perfect Olympic athlete, because he's always working on his own thing, working on his own thing. He's determined to get his time up and lift more weights. But he's not. When a young player would come to him, he was great. But it's like he never would go to the young player, or he rarely did. But when they came to him, he was wonderful. I cannot tell a lie. Arenado, the exact opposite. Well, Arenado said it himself. We got too many young guys in here.
Hmm.
And he's not a guy that will go out of his way to help young players. In fact, he gets annoyed by them. And I maintain on solid ground that the reason they went out and got Matt Carpenter and Brandon Crawford
Hmm.
is because Arenado was making such a ruckus behind the scenes about that. And that's why I hope they trade him. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like I don't know if you remember, Daniel, but towards the end of last season, I think he was talking to Derek Gould out in Colorado late in the
Hmm.
season. He basically said he recognizes the need to change some things about being more positive.
Yeah.
And I hope he meant that, because if he's going to be around this year, um, it'll be a disaster if he is negative and grouchy and aloof and all that stuff. I mean, that'll be a disaster.
Hmm.
It'll mess up a lot of what they're hoping for in 2025.
I hope so. And I know, you take it for what it's worth and staged pictures or whatever the case may be. But there were a couple pictures out at the end of the last year, I think, on his Instagram with him and Mason Wynn and Donovan and Newtbar, I think, all hanging out at after the food after a game or something like that. And again, I don't know if it means anything, but it would hopefully be a sign that he realizes that
Yeah.
he's got to do something different. So,
And
um,
I think at first he wondered about Mason Wynn.
mm,
And I think him and Mason Wynn, became tight as far as mutual respect
yeah,
last season. So that was a good development at first. At first, I don't think he knew what to make of Wynn, because Wynn, a lot of flair, very confident for someone 21, 22
mhm,
years old, very demonstrative. And, Arenado is old school, really hardcore old school. But I think he understood, hey, Mason Wynn's got a heart of gold. This guy just wants to win, period. And then they got to a really good place as teammates.
and that's a fun pairing at third and short. In it, I mean, defensively, um,
Yeah.
we'll see if that we see that again. Winter warm up this weekend. You think any kind of news will come out of that, or is it just a lot of well, it's not hot air because it's freezing cold, I think, in St. Louis.
There'll be some news because there's interview sessions all over the place.
Hmm.
Players, John Mozeliak, I'm sure Rob Cerfolio, who was hired to be the new farm director, assistant general manager, and I think they're going to have Rob Cerfolio out in front a lot this year, talking for the franchise, because Bloom's not going to do that this year.
Hmm.
But also, from what I was told, Bill DeWitt the junior and Bill DeWitt the third, they will have a session where they take questions from the fans. Mosaic is going to do the same. I think all the questions will be asked by the media. It's not going to be Jerry Springer show stuff that people seem to think is what you have to do to ask
Yeah.
on the point question. You can do it in a civil manner. It isn't about throwing chairs or like screaming at the person you're interviewing.
Yeah.
I think the right questions will be asked. I'm curious to see what the fans will ask. The fans are going to be there, are love the Cardinals, and they're very supportive. And in these sessions in the past, they have asked good questions where they would put DeWitt and Mo on the spot, but they were very polite about it.
Hmm.
So I'll be curious. What I'm curious is like whether John Mozeliak is going to kind of change his tune, or whether there's going to be a change in anything Bill DeWitt said in October compared to right now. I just want to see if there's any kind of shift in their thinking, or they're going to try to repurpose their messaging or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't imagine any other news, but I think it's what the people running the franchise have to say.
Yeah, and hopefully there is some, and not just the canned answers, like you said, with the Q&A that does help. I know, they've done Blogger Day for the last, well, since 2011, and Mo's usually really good about answering the questions that we put to him in a fairly honest way. So, hopefully we'll have a lot of that and some good questions to respond to. Bernie, this has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you joining me tonight. It's just been fun.
Sure. And anytime, man, put me on your yearly calendar or every 6 months or whatever you want to do. I'm here for you. So
We're gonna do
um,
it for
I,
sure.
I was so wound up, man. I was giving you 20-minute long answers. So what can I say?
That's what I like. I can just ask the question, and then I can sit back and not have to do anything. That's the role of a good host, I think, is to get out of the way.
Well,
Uh,
it was a pleasure doing it, and I want to thank you very much for inviting me and reaffirm once more how much I respect your work, your blogs, and the podcast that you've been doing. So it's finally nice to be able to talk Cardinals baseball together. I really appreciate it, man.
I do too. I appreciate it. Next week we'll have Matt Pauley here to join us. We've got a history moment from Richard over at Remembers after this. But until next week, for Bernie, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and with Dizzy Dean's recent birthday on January 16th, now feels like a good time to look back at how the right-hander from Bond, Mississippi became a Cardinals legend and a Hall of Famer. On July 27th, 1953, less than 6 years after he threw his final major league pitch, Dizzy Dean was inducted into the Hall of Fame after receiving 79.2% of the vote, more than any other candidate up for election that year. Dean was inducted alongside Al Simmons, a three-time All-Star and two-time batting champion who played most of his career with the Philadelphia Athletics. During the ceremony at Cooperstown, Dean was joined on the platform by some of the 62 previous Hall inductees, including Ty Cobb, Connie Mack, Cy Young, and Rogers Hornsby. "Them's the kind of ball players I'd like to have had behind me all the time," Dean said, before complimenting his former teammates who stopped them line drives and got some runs for me. Dean and his brothers grew up picking cotton, and with little in the way of a formal education, Dean enlisted in the Army. He was assigned to Fort Sam Houston, where he attracted the attention of a semi-pro team out of San Antonio. It was there that the Cardinals discovered Dean and signed him. On September 28, 1930, Dean made his major league debut, holding the Pirates to one run on just 3 hits. Before the game, St. Louis Mayor Victor Miller called Cardinals manager Gabby Street over to ask him about the new pitcher. "Mr. Mayor, I think he's going to be a great pitcher, but I'm afraid we never know from 1 minute to the next what he's going to do," Street told him. Indeed, despite Dean's successful outing, the Cardinals kept him in the minor leagues in 1931, perhaps as punishment for his tendency to charge items totaling thousands of dollars to the team. He was even known to register at several hotels for the same night, then sleep at whichever one was closest when he was ready to conclude the evening. Throughout his career, Dean was known to throw water balloons from hotel balconies, concoct ridiculous stories about his childhood to share with reporters, and generally exasperate Cardinals management. By 1932, however, Dean was simply too good to keep in the minors. He won 18 games that season with a 3.30 ERA and led the league in both innings pitched and strikeouts. He won 20 games and led the league in strikeouts again in 1933, including a record 17 strikeout game against the Cubs. In 1934, he reached 30 wins as he and his brother Paul led the Cardinals to a furious comeback to edge the Giants for the NL pennant. In the 1934 World Series, Dean posted a 1.73 ERA over 26 innings and held the Tigers to just 6 hits in a shutout Game 7 victory. That season, Dean was named the NL MVP. He finished second in each of the next 2 seasons, but by 1938, Dean, beset by injuries, was traded to the Cubs. He battled arm injuries throughout his time in Chicago and retired to take a coaching job with the Cubs in 1941. The 37-year-old Dean briefly returned in 1947 to pitch a single game with the Browns, throwing 4 shutout innings after he declared on a broadcast that he could still pitch better than the Browns hurlers. After Dean's national TV and radio broadcasting career concluded, he retired to Bond, Mississippi. He passed away on July 17, 1974, the same day that Bob Gibson threw his 3,000th career strikeout. So that's a quick look at how Dizzy Dean earned his place in Cooperstown. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, And go Cards.
Tying run at second base. In the air to right center. This game is tied. Going to third is Pujols, and it's 9-9. They just won't go away.